You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Welcome to the 21.5 Show, a podcast for professional pilots by professional pilots. Join Dylan and Max, both with experience in flight instruction, the airlines, and business aviation, as they talk to a variety of industry experts, share stories, and have a little fun along the way.
We're back. It's another episode of the show for the pros with two American men behind the mic in person.
A rare in-person
podcast
being recorded.
That means that Max has unlimited access to the soundboard, though. So I'm just going to warn you right now.
It's a little dicey.
We're going to be going. If you're new to the program, welcome. My name is Dylan. I'm a pilot in business aviation and one of your guides along our audio journey.
I'm Max. I am a professional airline pilot as well as still a corporate pilot. Long story.
We'll get into that another day.
Another day.
Yeah, listen to previous episodes if you want to get caught up. Speaking of your airline flying, you flew over a hurricane yesterday. We had an interview. I was tracking you. You're flying over the eye of the hurricane. I'm like, I wonder if he's going to make this.
It was more dramatic looking on FlightAware than it was in real life because I was going to Tampa and it already ripped across Florida, and it was at Nicole.
Yeah.
And so we were going to Tampa, and earlier in the day, I'm like, there's no way this is happening. And then sure enough, it weekend, and yeah, we were flying across the eye, but it was
It looked so amazing on FlightAware.
It looked cool, but yeah, it wasn't cool. As usual, just like when you film something on GoPro, you're like, oh, it's going to be so awesome. Then no, it's anticlimactic.
Never peters out.
Yeah, it was no big deal. Very windy. That's all. That's all I had to report.
And you had something else happen to you too, didn't you?
Oh, so if you're new to the show, you'll know Dylan and I are vehement opponents to commuting. Boom. And I was talking to this flight attendant today, talking about his commute or whatever. And I'm like, oh, yeah, where do you commute for? He goes, oh, from Guam. I was like, what? Yeah, it's a long story. And
the good news is your carrier regularly serves Guam. So
right, exactly. That's a good call. It's funny, though. He actually had a plan. It makes more sense when you heard the story.
The plan is to be home once a month, once a year?
No, he was a dispatcher at another airline.
Okay.
And he wants to be a dispatcher at our airline. And our airline predominantly, I guess they hire internally for dispatchers. So he has a good play. He's coming to start at the bottom or whatever. What else are you going to do where you could go back and forth to Guam?
Okay.
So it made sense when you said it from that. I don't think it's a long-term play.
Strategery.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then I was like, actually, it's
a good move.
Pretty good move.
Okay. All right. I salute you. Did you give him a link to our show?
No.
He could listen to our entire library.
I didn't want him to hear us badger his commute because that's the icing on the cake. Like commuting from Guam has got to be. I've heard from people commuting from London.
Yeah.
And from Hawaii or whatever, but that is aggressive.
That is really aggressive. He could listen to our entire library in one commute.
Could you imagine from Guam?
You know what's frustrating to me is when people recommend like a Netflix series and they're like, oh, you should watch this series. And you're like, yeah. And if you did a Guam commute, you could bang out the whole series out per leg. Be like, oh, yeah, this is good. Okay. Well, I'm glad you made it through the hurricane. Welcome back. We got a big show today. Our friend Jim Dunn from Flexjet is coming back to chat a little bit more about what's new at Flexjet. Spoiler alert, more money, more perks.
Yeah. How about that?
Yeah. Lots of good stuff. Plus, we get into a really great conversation about training.
The more I talk to him about Flex, the more impressed I am.
Yeah.
That is a professionally well, and then probably the rest of the Fractionals are too. Like I said, I feel like Fractionals is one of the things that we're, as a whole, pilots are the most ignorant of. We all know what it is, and it's a shared deal, and we hear 7 on, 7 off or something similar, but we don't really know much. And the more I learn, the more I'm like, that's a pretty solid deal.
It's a pretty solid deal. So stick around for that interview with Jim. Plus, we get into a really great conversation about training.
Yeah, he's a sharp dude.
Yeah, good stuff. And then, of course, as you remember, we moved Flight Advice to the end of the episode. Our boy Tim Pope is joining us.
Right, Diamond Dog.
The Diamond Dog.
Still can't get him to howl.
Yeah, that's pretty good. All right, let's jump right in, Max. We have 3 camo hats left for our faithful listeners.
I can't believe. I would have thought those would have sold before.
I know. They're moving now.
I'm a big camo guy.
James, Nicholas, Remington, and Kyle were the latest supporters to score their hats. So we also got a note from a fan who left a little review, if you want to read that for the kids.
Informative and entertaining. This is the pod for professional pilots or those weekend warriors out there. The information they provide is not only on point, but also comes with a little bit of charisma. By the end of the pod, you'll know more about a part of aviation that maybe you didn't know much on, or listen in to topics you do know about, but could use a refresher on. The guests are industry greats that bring unmistakable value to the show. I just wish there was more content like this to keep me entertained on the commute to and from work. Keep it up, guys. Listen, don't get your hopes up. This will not be coming more often than twice a week. This much I promise you.
That's from GFK B5. And so he listens on his commute too. Maybe it's also Guam. Maybe there's a couple.
But the funny is, all of our listeners listen on their commute.
Yeah.
And then we just sit here and rip on commuting. Maybe that's not good for our listenership.
Yeah. If you would like to write us a review, we'd certainly appreciate it. Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, do that. And then shoot us an email, info@215podcast.com, and we'll send you some stickers.
I just thought of something. We should do a poll because, like, why do you commute? Like, my wife wants to live here.
Oh.
Or I grew up here. Or what are the other reasons?
Oh, I would say, like, family support network, especially if you got kids. Like, maybe grandma lives in this city.
Can't afford to live in base.
My kids
Not
are
anymore.
in school, and I switched jobs. My airline closed the base. Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons.
I would be interested though, like if you could break down like a percentages.
That would be really interesting. We'll set a poll up.
For a poll, we have to have all the reasons. You have to select them.
Yeah. We'll have to do it. That's a good idea. Okay, on to the mailbag, Max, which of course is brought to you by our friends at advanced.aircrewacademy.com. You can visit their website to see all of their offerings. We recently just had Ryan on the show. He broke down winter operations. I think that's becoming a very real topic for everybody. Have you flown in the snow yet?
No?
No?
Not yet. Very close. Not yet.
Check out that episode if you are getting ready to do some winter ops. It's time to prepare. Check out the module that Advanced Aircrew Academy has on their website, aircrewacademy.com. On to the mailbag. Here we go. Dylan and Max. I've been listening to you guys for a couple of years, and I think you have the most informative and enjoyable aviation podcast out there. I'm spreading the word on you guys to fellow pilots and future pilots, but not commuters. Oh, we didn't say that. Keep up the great work. Just listen to episode 87 concerning BizAv pilot retention. The following two statements made by one of your guests really stood out. We cannot and will not compete with airline salaries, and 3 hard days off a month really meets a lot of expectations. I think both statements illustrate the main reason owners and operators of BizAv aircraft should expect the exodus of their most qualified and experienced pilots to the airlines to continue unabated for many years. Your thoughts? By the way, every time I hear you sign off with flexibility is the key to air power, I'm reminded of an old Navy buddy who said, flexibility is too rigid. You've got to be fluid. And that's signed anonymous.
That's funny. So how long have we been doing this podcast?
It's almost 4 years.
Okay. So since we started this podcast, in 4 years' time,
Yes.
things have gone gangbusters, of
Correct.
which we always were like, oh, things are too good. Things are going too well. And that's when you know the cliff.
Yep.
And then COVID happened, and it felt like we fell off the cliff.
Yep.
Not that anybody could predict that, but it's just things happen. And so we fell off the cliff. We're talking about furloughs, the furlough flute, with a whole gloom and doom. We're doing podcast updates because things were changing for the negative so fast and this whole thing, right? Now it comes roaring back. Everyone's hiring over thousands of pilots a year. Things are crazy. The regionals are paying everybody. There's mass exodus from business aviation. That's in 4 years' time.
Yeah.
That all has happened in less than 4 years. So my point is, when he says years to come, it could be months to come, could be days to come, could be weeks, could be years, could be decades. Who knows? Because the thing is, this is so unpredictable, but when it goes up, it always comes down. And right now we are on the up.
Big up.
Big up.
Big ups.
But like I said, there's a top to every mountain, and we will reach it. And I don't know when that will be. There's no way to tell. Nobody does. But at some point, as we always say, the music will stop. And all of those BizAv pilots that had their apps into the airlines that haven't gotten a call, guess what? They're going to be sitting in the seat that they're in until the music starts again. And who knows? And then by the time music starts, life changes. And then people are, I'm too old now, or I don't want to move, or whatever. And that changes. And so, this is going to continue to the way it is while the conditions remain the same, but they will not remain the same forever.
Correct. I agree with that. So what do you think about his points, though, right now? Let's say things didn't change for the next 5 years. The two statements, we cannot compete with airline salaries, and 3 hard days off a month meets a lot of expectations. That was not the emailer's point. That was the point of one of the folks we interviewed.
So those statements illustrate the main reason owners and operators should expect the exodus, because those are the two main problems, is what he's saying.
Yeah.
Which they are. And when you say salaries, I think you have to include benefits in there too, right?
Yeah.
I think he's right, as long as conditions remain the same. Those are huge, because it's either quality of life and being able to have some sort of control of your schedule while probably flying more, and the money. Do you have to work for it more? You have to fly more. Maybe not more days away for some people, depending on the job, because there's such wild variability, but Most of the people that we talk to that have gone to the airlines would fall into one of those categories, either the schedule control or the money.
Sure. I guess the point that I think the emailer is trying to make is the problem is that we are settling with saying we can't compete with airlines' salaries and that these 3 hard days off a month is all you need. I think he's saying, why can't we have that?
Because what it comes down to, I think, is depending on the airplane and the total budget, you just can't pay somebody $350,000 a year to fly a beach jet. It doesn't work in the total cost of the operation.
Yep. So I think we're paying to say no one in business aviation can compete with airline salaries. That's not accurate. But I would say, the vast majority.
I think it's just a matter of the percentage of the total budget. You just can't be paying $800,000 a year for the crew.
Yep.
Unless your budget is $5 million. Most big airplane budgets right now are 1.5 plus or minus a couple hundred. So, you're paying 2 guys $400,000 for the lead and $300,000 for the
second banana. That's $700,000. That's half of the budget. And it's just like, and I think the reason airline pilots get paid more is because we are more productive in that, like, we generate more revenue to offset the salaries and because we fly more. Yep.
So just a different dynamic.
Oh, that brought out a good conversation. I love that email. Thank you so much, Anonymous, for sending that in. So a couple other kind of funny items that came into the mailbag. Ted, our boy, has been on the prowl lately with some photos. He sent us a picture of airline pilot guitar guy, which I posted on Instagram.
But the other thing, too, did you pick out something else about what else was peculiar about that photo?
Remind me.
Did you see his shoes, dude?
Are they made of rubber? Are they Crocs?
I'm trying to pull it up. Yeah, look at his shoes, dude. They're like Converse, like all black Converse.
Yeah, that's very musician appropriate.
I know.
Yeah, you just go right into the nightclub.
But how could you look at yourself with a straight face in the mirror with black Converse shoes on?
I think you just do it. You just go for it.
I guess in the airline uniform, there's very little you have to make it you, right? The shoes are one of them.
There you go.
What else? The watch, the pants.
Yeah, I thought that was good.
Right.
And then you got a great picture of a guy doing like an online game in the crew room on a laptop with his headset on, talking to people.
Oh my gosh. Maybe he's on reserve. I'd cut him some slack if he's like,
is there no ready reserve?
Yeah, but there's dudes hanging out to commute in to check into the hotel at 3 or 4, whatever. There's guys and gals hanging out.
Okay.
I would cut him some slack if he was gaming.
If you're up to shady stuff, you just watch out because Ted's out there.
He's on the prowl.
He's keeping an eye on things.
Yeah, the funny part is Ted doesn't even listen to this, does he?
Yeah, I can't think that he does. No.
And he's a commuter.
Yeah.
Who knows? What's he listening to?
He just stares off into the abyss.
Let's call him right now and see what he listens to on his commute.
He just stares off into the abyss.
What's up?
What's up? Hey, we're on the show right now. It's me and Dylan.
Oh.
I just have a couple of quick questions for you real quick. We were talking about the guitar guy.
Oh,
the picture you sent?
Yeah.
Did you notice the other thing in that photo that was a little interesting?
I got to look that photo back up. There was something else.
He was wearing black Converse.
Yeah. He was a piece of work right in the lane of the hotel.
I bet. Did you guys sit around the campfire and listen and sing songs or anything? He's got to look. You got to give him that.
Yeah.
Got to move. Wait, so do you listen to the show?
No, not really.
Wait, so what do you listen to or do on your commute?
I read online forums on the union forums. They advise on my phone.
Do you really?
Yes. Sometimes I post.
Do you? Are you a poster?
Ted, can we sell your posting name to our listeners and for the premium
can
content?
Can we auction it?
Yeah.
For charity?
You have to have a premium membership for that.
All right, Elon.
I've served a couple of suspensions on a couple forums too. APC cut me out for 3 weeks at one point. I picked a fight with a moderator and he shut me down.
And he won. Yeah.
Was this back in your regional airline days?
No, this was 6 months ago.
Do you usually spend as much time on the boards if you're not in contract negotiations? If things are just...
yeah, probably. It's the lifestyle.
No social media, anything like that? Just strictly the
airline pilot
forums.
Just a big tap-a-talk guy.
You know what I mean? Like all the other 54-year-old Airbus FOs.
Just grinding it out, huh?
Yeah, me and all the T-Way guys just pissed off at the world.
Half the listeners don't even know what a T-Way guy is.
Yeah, exactly. That's all right. Let's leave it that way.
Shockingly, still have the same seniority. That's another whole podcast.
Yeah, that's a whole other episode. You're right.
Don't out yourself.
Yeah, we don't want to try to explain the Casco bond right now.
That's going to get its own headline.
All right. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Teddy.
Thanks for taking my call.
I'm actually at a museum right now. If that surprises you.
A children's museum?
It is.
Did it finally get too cold for you to let your child just run around outside?
No, it'll never get cold enough.
All right. Well,
have fun, Teddy.
Let us know what you learned.
Happy hours have definitely changed.
Bottle service has been redefined.
Yeah, literally.
That's funny.
All right, Teddy. See ya.
Later.
That was an unexpected twist to the mailbag. We're going to charge Advanced Aircrew Academy a little extra on that one, I think. Okay. Last thing in the mailbag is you reviewed some coffee a couple weeks ago that we got. Another kind of startup sent us some stuff, and that's F Level, and they make some wallets and pilot document holders. They sent us a couple things to check out, and I want to talk about it for a little bit because it is so freaking cool, and it's actually something that I've been looking for a while. And so the thing that I've been checking out is called the Pilot Document Holder 737, and what it is a one-stop like wallet to hold all of my certificates and documents. So what I love about this thing, it's got a huge window that fits a medical where you don't have to fold it all 10 ways. And right behind it, you can throw your vaccine card if you got it, and it all fits in there without having to fold that, which is cool.
Yeah, I would have that if I were like a commuter and have that with your KCM card too.
Yes,
so you just
flip all that out. Yes.
Got your passport right there. You hand it to the dude or gal. And then the problem with me is I fly my own plane.
Yeah.
So I still have to have that stuff. So I keep it in my wallet. So I always have it with me. So bring it back around. But yeah, if you didn't need to keep your certificate with you and stuff, like that thing is solid.
And then it's got another flip with for pilot certificate, your FCC license, and then the passport in the clear window, which I love. Without giving away any like security stuff, like you do need your passport still when you're jump seating, right?
Yeah.
So everything's in one spot. Now I'm like you, I just keep this with me all the time. I just couldn't carry all that stuff in my wallet.
Well, I have like a certain thing that stays in my work flight bag of the stuff I need, and then I have just my certificate medical in my wallet because I use that when I fly a small plane.
And then the cool thing is on the back, they have a little pouch to put your air tag in there.
That's perfect.
Which
is cool because if you leave that in your flight bag, then it
solves all the problems. Yeah, because I had an air tag on my flight bag, but I was leaving my document holder in there anyways, and I'm like, well, if I just put it on my document holder, it's great. Yeah. And then the other thing is too, like I have actually done this before when I checked in one time to jump seat back in the glory days. I left my passport with the gate agent on accident.
Whoops. And
this would have prevented that.
And then I lost my passport like an idiot. Remember? 6 months ago? It was a nightmare.
Yeah.
And still to this day, I have no idea. I found it in the back in the very corner of my airplane. Why I had my passport in there, I still do not know.
Yeah. So I love this document holder. It's cool. They've got a couple different options on it. They've got one with a zipper and one with a button. We'll have a link in the show notes, and I'm going to post some pictures of this thing on the socials so you guys can check it out. But flyflevel.com to check this out. If I was a commuter at the airlines, this thing is like a no-brainer.
Yeah, it's super
everything.
Cool. And then I got a wallet that has their logo, which is an airplane in a metal thing in the corner, and then has a remove before flight tag, kind of
classic.
Very small though. It's kind of cool because it's like a little bit sniper.
It kind of looks like the Levi's jeans thing.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's a really nice wallet. It has a big 737 like embossed inside. It's really cool. So I will be using that.
I love what they're doing there. And it's a pilot that owns the company, and he's just getting it going. So
he knows what you need.
Yeah. So come on.
Check it out.
So he sent us an extra one, which we're going to be giving away to listeners.
Of the document holder.
Yeah, of the document holder. This one would be awesome for anyone that wants to keep all of their documents in one place. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give everyone a little bit of time here. So until the end of the month, end of November, we want you to do two things, and you'll be entered in to win this. The first thing, we want you to go follow F Level on Instagram, and we'll have a link in the show notes for that. And then, and this is going to sound a little weird, we want you to go follow us on Twitter at 215 Podcast. And if you follow us on Twitter already, you know we're not doing a ton on Twitter right now, but we're going to be, because Twitter Spaces is where you can do live podcasts and have live guests interact during the show. And we want to start doing that with our listeners. We want to bring the Diamond Dogs on and basically do live flight advice episodes for you guys, so you can tune in, and we'll get like James and Tim Pope and other people. And so you have your questions, we can bring you right up on stage and you can ask them live. It'll be really cool. So anyways, yeah, we love these document holders. If you want to get into that drawing for the pilot document holder, follow us on Twitter at 215 Podcast, and follow Fly F Level, link on our website for all of the instructions to enter to to win. All right. Okay. That is the mailbag.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Should we get to the interview?
Let's do it.
All right.
Here we go. Our call with Jim Dunn from Flexjet. Max, we're so excited to welcome back our friend Jim Dunn. He's the director of training at Flexjet. And Jim, we've got a lot more questions for you. Turns out folks are really interested in the fractionals. So welcome back to the program.
Great to be here, guys. Thank you very much for the invitation to come back and talk to you guys. I'm really looking forward to the interview here.
So Jim, we get tons of emails from our listeners. A lot of them, especially regional airline pilots, and they're saying, hey, I'm really considering leaving the airlines to go to the fractionals. And it seems like there's a lot of maybe unknowns about the fractionals. And as I mentioned to you, it's one of our most popular episodes because I think that folks maybe don't understand a lot of it. So we'd encourage people, if they haven't listened to that interview with Jim on the previous episode, kind of talking about the nuts and bolts of flying fractionals, you can go back and do that. But today, Jim, we just kind of want to talk to you. What's new? It's been a year. The industry is changing a ton. Tell us what it's like right now to be a pilot at Flexjet. What's new?
Being a pilot at Flexjet right now is providing a lot of growth opportunities. So we're on a big growth spurt within the company and moving through the market. So we're doing quite a bit of hiring. Our hiring goals for 2022 was 350 pilots, and we've hit that goal. Rolling into 2023, we expect to hire equal that amount of pilots and possibly a little bit more, probably closer to 420 pilots for growth. And so we're trying to basically dominate the world of fractional right now with our growth plans. But there's a lot of exciting things we've done in that year's time to increase the quality of life for our pilots. The first one, big one, was pay raises across the board for all of our pilots.
Woo-hoo.
So yeah, absolutely. So I believe last time I was on the podcast with you guys, the starting pay for our first officer was right at about $100,000. It's been increased to a starting pay of about $125,000 for the first year for first officer. So quite a substantial increase.
Wow.
And then we did substantial increases for the pilots that are currently on the payroll here. We added a couple of other features as well for pilots. We added an enhancement to our retirement and retention. We offered a deferred compensation program, which is 6% on top of your base salary that pilots get to have access to after a 3-year deferment. And they have options with it where they can take that money and deposit it in their 401k, or they can take it out in a cash lump sum. So that's another incentive that we've offered our pilots. Since the last time we talked to you, we started with 80 bases, I believe was what we had last time. And we're now up to 110 different bases that you can choose from. And then, of course, upgrades and the programs that we've brought to the fractional market. So there's a lot of great opportunities for pilots at Flexjet right now. And we're really excited about the direction of where the company's going.
That's awesome, Jim. Hey, so a metric that all pilots can understand when you're talking about growth, what's upgrade time to captain?
Yeah, so that's a really good one. So our normal path for a pilot, they get hired into one of our 3 core fleet airplanes, which is going to be the Phenom or the Challenger or the Praetor. And then your first upgrade opportunity is to the small cabin airplane. And currently today, that's running somewhere around 7 to 10 months on property. So we're moving relatively quickly. And most of this for aircraft deliveries. So as we move pilots into large cabin fleets, into super mids and mid-sized cabin fleets, those growth opportunities happen in the Phenom. And then from the Phenom, once a captain there, we take the philosophy, once a captain, always a captain. Your next upgrade opportunity is going to be into the super mid-size or mid-size aircraft, your choice. And that's running at just over about 2.5 years on property right now. So there's a lot of movement, a lot of growth happening within the company.
No kidding.
Wow. That's exciting to hear.
Yeah.
And from the last episode, you mentioned kind of the red label and international opportunities that are out there. That's pretty much stayed the same.
Yeah. So those programs have stayed the same and have been growing. It's probably about 75 to 85% of our pilot positions. So basically, when you become a captain in the Praetor fleet or the Challenger fleet, that puts you in our domestic red label program. And that would be the path that I just described to you. And we bring on large cabin aircraft. It's an opportunity for pilots to get into international flying. And we do that by an interview process. So that's open and eligible to all pilots on our seniority list. So once you come onto our seniority list day one, it is possible for you to go into our international large cabin program. Probable, maybe not, because people don't know you yet. But it is very probable for a pilot to spend on the grounds for about 2 years to get into that program. And we put several pilots from that time frame.
Let's talk a little bit about the minimums right now and what's kind of competitive. What are you seeing pilots apply with and be successful?
You know, our average pilot is probably, we'll take applications as low as 1,500 hours with your ATP, CTP written currently right now. A competitive pilot here, from what we see, is probably anywhere between 2,000 and 3,000 hours is realistically competitive. Usually, the pilots that do very successful in their transition here have come out of a flight instructing job or some other type of training type of job and into their first professional job. And then they're transitioning from their first professional job, whether that's the regionals or the charter operators, into this type of flying. But we've had some successful flight instructors that have come right out of flight instructing who have been able to come into our program. We've had military pilots. We've even had people who have come in with second careers and have done very successful here.
Awesome.
That's great to hear.
Jim, give us a brief overview of what initial training looks like at Flexjet and maybe some tips for success in training, especially as the average flight time of pilots has been getting lower and lower.
Always a challenge. Our initial training footprint for a pilot coming in, it's basically broken up into 4 parts. So the first part of it is a 3-day course up in our Cleveland headquarters office. I call that the soft NDOC or company NDOC. That's where we learn how to be a pilot, the things that are expected of you as a Flexjet pilot. We talk about ordering your uniforms and doing your expense reports, setting up your cell phone and all the ins and outs of actually doing the job on a daily basis, not necessarily regulatory, but that are just as important. So I call them the soft rules, basically. And so that's a 3-day course. And that usually culminates with a big dinner with our senior managers and Part 119 personnel. So they get to meet the people that they're actually working with on a regular basis in operations. We then bring them down to the Dallas office here. And it is a 7-day basic NDOC course. And all the requirements that the FAA has us do before you get to the aircraft training. So that's op specs and M specs, FAR, threat and error management, CRM, meteorology, all those fun topics that we've probably covered a bunch of different ways. And that's where we have the opportunity to put Flexjet spin on those items and talk about them in our SOPs and how we use those particular topics on a daily basis. When a pilot comes into first day of NDOC, that's when they get their aircraft assignment. And then we will give them the rest of their training schedule at the end of that first day. And then they go to their aircraft training. And their aircraft training is going to run somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2.5 to 3.5 weeks, depending on which airframe they're on, the Praetor being the longest of the 3. And that's going to be 1 week of systems and systems integration, and then followed by 6 simulators, a check ride, and a loft. And then once they finish that, we send them home for 7 days, a minimum of 7 days. Let them decompress a little bit, see their family, do all the things that makes people human. And then we schedule them for an OE event. We put them out for an OE event, and that's basically a 2-part event. The first part of it is what we call phase 1 or a POE. And that's where you take all that theory that you learned about the aircraft in class and you put it together. So that's an extended pre-flight of the aircraft, where the safety equipment is, basically getting used to flying the airplane. And that'll culminate with a single landing in the aircraft. And then once we complete that, then we do an additional 25 hours of with a standards captain or instructor pilot. And then when we checked all those satisfactory boxes, we send the pilot home for a couple of days. We build out the rest of their schedule for that bid period, and we teach them how to bid, and they're in the system at that point.
So wait, on that first, where you do the first landing and the first phase of that OE, is that with passengers, or you guys take it up empty?
We take it up empty. That gives the pilots a little bit of confidence flying the airplane for the first time. So we either do it on a position leg, or we'll do it on a separate empty leg to get that done.
Oh, that's cool. For many of us in the airline world, you don't get that luxury the first time you land the airplane with people in the back, hammer time. So Jim, to kind of circle back a little bit, you mentioned the minimum's down to 1,500 hours, and we're seeing that at pretty much many of the carriers are bringing folks on with 1,500 hours. And we're starting to get emails from listeners saying, I'm struggling in training. I failed out of training. I didn't understand what this was going to be like. And it's a challenge. And Max and I have always encouraged folks when they reach out, we say, look, training is kind of a marathon. It's not a sprint. For pilots, especially that are go-getters and they want to learn everything, be as sharp as they can, we see folks burn themselves out and maybe not realize that the scope of these training events, it takes a while. You're not going to learn it all in one day. You see so many folks going through training every month. Do you have some advice for our listeners when they run into trouble in training, kind of maybe common mistakes and maybe some thoughts on how folks can get through training successfully?
Sure. So your training event should really actually be a fun event. We've all worked really hard in this profession to get to where we've gotten to, and we're just building onto that. So I think a lot of people come in very apprehensive about training and feel like it's a Jeopardy event and someone's trying to check them out of the training process. And it's absolutely the opposite of that. If the company has invited you to come on board to join that company, they want to see you succeed. They want to do everything they possibly can to ensure that it's going to be a successful outcome for that pilot, because they're investing a lot of money in them and they're looking forward to them being part of that company. So the best advice I can give somebody coming in, effort and attitude is going to go a long way when you come in there. I would say the first thing you do is demonstrate the character that you were hired for when you walk in. And that means, first of all, starting by showing up on time, come in dressed appropriately for the class, come in with an open mind, and don't be the big talker in the class, but be the listener in the class. Don't mistake that for not asking questions or making sure you understand the material, but that's always going to be a good start for anyone coming in there. And then I would say the next thing is understand what is the expectation of the company and what they're looking for at the outcome of the training event. Most professional training programs are looking for you to fill some basic blocks. Understand the SOPs and procedures of the company. understand your aircraft, including the limitations and memory items, have a basic understandings of the call outs and flows. If you've got those 3 buckets right there, you've got 95% of your training event hammered out. So, that's where you really want to spend that focus. It does take a little bit of self-discipline for anyone coming in there. Coming into a training event, you have to mentally prepare yourself for it's a focus course. It's going to take somewhere in the neighborhood of about 4 weeks of my time to really focus on it. The challenge with that is we're all human and we all have lives outside of training. So have that discussion and that briefing with your family before you go in there and tell them, hey, this is what I'm going to be doing and this is the focus that I'm going to need to have. And then in the event that something happens in your life, what I see most of the time, side rails people, just because we're human, you have things going on at home or you have family, you have people get sick or whatever it is. Don't be afraid to get somebody in the boat early and let them know what's going on. Again, the company's objective is to see you succeed. And I can tell you from Flexjet's point of view, we're going to do everything we possibly can to help you out to ensure you're going to be successful.
That's well said. Inevitably, pilots are going to run into problems in training. Maybe they have to redo a sim session, or maybe there's some type of stage check failure. I think for some folks, the message that we get from them is they're isolated. They feel like they're the only one that's done this. They think they're going to get fired. In general, you must see this pretty often, right? Somebody has to repeat something, they struggle. Do you give people pep talks? How do you kind of encourage a pilot that's maybe struggling with this particular topic?
Absolutely. I have yet to see anybody come in here and just fly a perfect training event, including myself and every other professional I've had the opportunity to talk to. We'll give them a pep talk. We'll talk to them. We want to find out what the root of the problem is, and we want to help them solve the issue and make them better. If they're feeling by themselves and isolated, unfortunately, I think that's a misnomer because everybody fails. Everyone has struggles. Everyone has challenges. And the ones that haven't discovered those challenges yet, just wait. It's going to happen at some point in your career. And so they need to know that they're in good company with professionals out there. The objective of getting someone through training is you're putting a big investment in these people and you want them to be there. So we're going to do everything you can to ensure that they're going to be successful and give them that support that they need. And, it doesn't hurt to ask for support too. If you're struggling in a particular area, don't be afraid or embarrassed to ask somebody for help in that area. It's been my experience that most people learn better from their failures than their successes.
It's funny because aviation training is such a head game that I think a lot of people that aren't in it understand that from check rate anxiety to messing up in the sim and just kind of losing it. Like it's like playing a round of golf where if you have a bad stroke and it affects the rest of your game, pilots are notorious for that. And so, like you said, the advice for people is that look, people have to go into it knowing they're going to make a mistake like we all have, and B, be willing to ask for help when they need it. Because the other thing, people, they're not catching on or they're struggling with something and they won't ask for help and it just snowballs from there. And you can see it. And we're our own worst enemy sometimes, I think, in the training environment.
Sure. We're in a business that demands perfection with imperfect people. And the biggest struggle that people have, and especially people who are very type A and usually in the profession, is being able to shake those mistakes off. And the best thing you can do is really shake it off and move forward and learn from it. That's why the debriefs are just so important because you can absorb so much on that. And get past yourself and move on. Like I said, your failures are going to happen, and that's where you're going to develop the most of your learning.
Yeah. Now, Jim, so we all make mistakes, whether it's in training or even out on the line. And at the airlines, we have a FOQA or FDAP, depending on where you are. And we gather all that data from the airplane and the whole program. And then that influences our recurrent training to try and train those deficiencies out, which we've talked about on the show. Can you tell us a little bit about how you guys utilize that sort of program?
Sure, absolutely. So we've established a FDM program throughout our fleet. That's been a big campaign for us over the last 2 years to have all of our aircraft equipped with the FDM transmitters. And so we're really just on the cutting edge and learning part of that. And it's kind of a relatively new thing in the 135 environment. We're pretty excited about the data that we're actually getting from the FDM program. We've made several changes as a result of FDM data as we start to analyze it and we start to learn about it and learn how effective we can actually apply that to our operation. To give an example, we have several airplanes that run a particular manufacturer's engine, and buried deep in a maintenance book back there is a 3-minute cool down period on that engine that kind of gets lost. You probably talk about it in your initial course. And it's one of those things when you're learning everything else about an airplane, it kind of gets brushed aside. We started looking at FDM data and started looking at some of the wear and tear on our engines and went back to that, worked with our maintenance partners and came back to that 3-minute cool down. As a result of that, we changed some of the flows and procedures on our checklist. And we went from basically about as 25% compliance because people had forgotten about it to 100% compliance. So that's one of the benefits of FDM. I'll give you another example as well. Stabilized approaches and go-arounds. Stabilized approaches is a big focus in the industry right now. So everyone's taking a look at that in the FDM data. We've compared ourselves against industry and we've put out several positive communications about focusing on stabilized approaches and the results of stabilized approaches. We've made changes at certain airports we operate as a result of that as well, because of the shorter runways and locations of FBOs. I think people subconsciously don't think about that when they're operating their aircraft. And we've also done a promotion on go arounds. We've taken the go around. We made a promotion out there making a normal maneuver. I think a lot of pilots think it's a buck maneuver or a maneuver that is abnormal. And so we've actually taken it and we've made it a positive for us, the go around, where we're promoting it on our OE events. We have our pilots actually go out there and do a go around on an empty leg when they first learn flying the lanes with the IP or CP to get used to doing that. And then when we see people who've gone around on an unstabilized approach, our safety department's calling them and asking them what happened and giving them good jobs when they did a great job and did what they're supposed to.
I saw your checklist, actually. It says the first thing on the go around is pat yourself on the back. Good job.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I think that's one thing as a Part 91 operator, I really look at with jealousy from like what Max has at the 121 carriers and as the larger operators are getting is all this fleet data. And you can just make your operation better by getting this information. I don't know, this may be a pipe dream, but hopefully someday some of this information on large fleet types that the fractionals are operating, maybe they'll be able to share some of that information with the training centers and it'll filter down to just regular fleet operators someday.
I think that's a definite possibility in the future. I think the training centers are getting on board with fleet data monitoring as well, with some of the technology that's coming out and being able to conduct simulator sessions. The combination between actual operational flight data monitoring and training data monitoring is going to be a brilliant tool to take pilots into the future, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I don't really know a ton about the flight data monitoring, like from the nuts and bolts and the hardware. What is it? Is it something that's just tapping into your instruments and your FMS, or what do you know?
So it taps into the aircraft systems. It's a little box, no bigger than probably 6 inches. It goes into a cannon plug in the back of the airplane, and it takes data from all sorts of sensors on the aircraft. When the aircraft touches down, weight on wheels, it actually will send that data via a 5G connection directly to the data monitoring portal. So you have almost instantaneous data available to review once they land.
That is really interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty comprehensive. It's not my program, so I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this, but it covers a lot of data and captures quite a bit.
I just am so excited, I think, because Max shares with me how they look at that and craft their training. It's data-driven. I think that's so smart. So,
yeah, and that's the future of training is data-driven training and scenario-based training. The AQP is the direction, we call it AQP. That's effectively what it is. It's scenario-based and data-based training.
In aviation, we've always been so reactive, even from the advent of TCAS. And remember the advent of en route radar was because of a super constellation crashing over the Grand Canyon. Remember that?
That's right.
And GPWS is because of CFIT accidents that had happened and people had to die before we would make these big changes in our business. And now we're finally trying to peer into the future to see where the trend is going and the end of the road is and prevent it before you get there. And that's, I think, probably one of the biggest changes we've made in this safety of this business. And
one of
the biggest changes ever, for sure.
Hands down. It is probably the most forward-thinking thing we've done in a long time in the aviation industry. And as you mentioned, most things in aviation, actually a lot of businesses are reactive to things that have happened. And it's kind of nice to be actually on the front looking forward and being able to make corrective actions as a result of that.
Yeah, and I think as a result of that, and obviously it starts with the biggest operators, which are the airlines, and now it's come to the big operators like Flexjet and NetJets and everybody else. It's going to trickle down to everybody that operates turbine-powered airplanes.
I hope so.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of time.
Around it. It's too valuable, too good of a program.
It's a nice little revenue stream you can sell.
Yeah, I'm sure flight safety or someone will figure out how to get everybody else bundled in to tailor your training and charge you $100,000 a year for it.
Yeah. Oh, would you like the flight data monitoring package? Yeah.
Well, maybe a possibility.
So one other thing we wanted to talk to you about, Jim, and this is especially for us Part 91 operators, is takeoff, runway analysis, takeoff performance. And Max and I have talked about this on the show before. For many folks that are familiar with runway analysis, we can use it to have basically an alternate path if there's an engine failure after takeoff, and it allows us to take off at a higher weight. We can get into that at a whole discussion another time. But one hot thing that always happens when we do this is sometimes we have two flight paths, right? We have our, this is the SID we filed for departure. We also have this alternate takeoff path. Many times they're similar or the same. Sometimes they have to diverge. And if for Part 91 operators especially, maybe they'll see it in training and maybe the instructor will say, you can enter an alternate flight plan and execute it and on one side or split the cockpit. There's a million different ways you can do it. And I'm just curious, in the evolution of you guys using this system, what have you learned? What have you seen work? Can you share with us a little bit about your insight on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we use APG for our runway analysis and takeoff performance. What we've done basically in our aircraft procedures is we've taken it and we've broken it up into three basic boxes. We've broken it up into a simple departure, which is basically a straight out runway departure, a ground-based departure, which would be a departure that is based on VORs and ground tracking equipment, localizers, et cetera. And then a complex departure, which is generally going to be that departure that diverges from the normal flight path. It's also going to be GPS based and where you'll have flyover points instead of smart turn points, et cetera, that you have to make changes to. You're going to see those types of departures out of more complex airports with high terrain. Take Aspen. That's a really good option when we're talking
perfect
about.
example.
So we've standardized that across each one of our fleets, and we standardized it based on the avionics. And the reason we standardize it based on the avionics is because a Collins box may operate slightly different than, say, a Honeywell box or a Garmin box. So we've designed special procedures for each one of the avionics, and we set the aircraft up specifically based on the avionics in the aircraft. Give an example, the Challenger 300, 350 that I fly, we operate two different FMSs on there, a 6200 and a Collins 5000. And we actually do two different approaches to how we actually enter the complex procedures into the box. So on the 6200, it allows us to put it in the secondary flight plan. So we'll actually put the second path in the secondary flight plan with a plan to execute it in the event that we lose that engine. So the pilot monitoring will actually execute and activate that flight plan while the pilot's flying it. And then if we're flying a Challenger 300 with a 5000, we actually tag that into the end of our flight plan. And so we will bring that to the first point up on that departure on a divergent point up on one of the FMSs. We'll split them. And then in the event that we lose an engine, the pilot monitoring will activate it at that point where it comes up on both FMSs. So you've got the data available to you. So we've standardized that across the fleet. But really the key to these departure briefings is not only the standardization of it, but the briefing of it and making sure that both pilots are on the same page. The last thing you want to do is be lost out there when you lose that engine and one pilot's doing one thing and the other pilot's doing another.
Yeah, that's so smart. What a good way to do that. Because we've been talking about that forever. And I think most Part 91 operators, they get the APG data. For Aspen's a perfect example. Because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but on the lens, normally you take off and then it turn right and then left. And then it diverges somewhere really quickly after takeoff the APG procedure.
Yes.
And I think people blast off with no plan. Be like, oh yeah, we'll follow this if we lose a motor, which is just 0% chance of you being able to do that on the fly.
Absolutely. The plan has to happen before you even get in the cockpit, and you need to think about that. And it starts with the SOPs that you write for those departures. And then, of course, the briefings are the backing and the compounding of ensuring that the pilots are all on the same page.
That's really interesting.
It's funny because I've spoken to some simulator instructors, and the good ones will pry a little bit in the briefing room. And they'll be like, well, what do you guys do? How do you guys do this? And then they'll throw something at you and they say half the time, at least, people can't actually fly these alternate routes because they're not prepared for it. And there's certainly an element of every single leg, you need to follow the same type of procedure. So for me, I've been really trying to focus on the acceleration altitude, just as one of the things that I've been trying to monitor better. And I'm trying to do that on every single leg, is get that actually put in I spin it in the MDA on my avionics. And then it's right there on the screen. But just some of those things that I think I've got to get these habits on, because if I'm not practicing this every single leg, when it's time to actually cook the meal, it's going to be ugly.
Absolutely. Yeah, you'll be in trouble. That technique we've turned into an SOP about putting the acceleration altitude in the MDA as well.
Oh,
most of the time, it's going to be 1,500 feet above the field elevation until it's not. That's why it's important to put it in there. And that's a great technique. And I highly recommend people put that as an SOP.
Yeah, that's what we bugged out at the airlines before every departure.
mm-hmm.
And that's the thing where you learn a lot from being Part 91 in business aviation and going to a larger operator. While the need for standardization isn't quite as great when you're flying with the same person all the time, but the thought and procedures and things that go into daily operations in those larger operations, just because of the economy of scale, and you have to mitigate the risk if you're doing 4,000 flights a day or whatever, that's got to trickle down to 91 people. And even 135, if you have op specs to be able to utilize APG, it seems ludicrous to not have the procedures to go with it.
Yeah, there has been rumor that the FAA has also thought of that. And there may be an AC coming out at some point talking exactly about that with these departures, because more and more operators are getting them. And the departures are great if you know how to use them. But if you don't know how to use them, they're not valuable to you at all.
Yeah, it's increasing the risk rather than mitigating it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess the avionics, that's an interesting way, but I'm curious, like, has there been any other like evolution of the use of the procedure, kind of lessons learned along the way for you guys on this?
Wow. Lessons learned along the way. Yeah. I mean, when we first started with it, we didn't have these standardized procedures. And through the course of events, you just kind of learn things. And when you talk about things coming into training and coming into SOPs, where you're getting that data from is your ASAP reports, and then FDM would be the next layer of that. And so, to be honest with you, we never had that before until we got to a point where it was like, hey, we're operating in cockpits with a lot of different people and standardizing this approach. So, yeah, that's absolutely a lesson learned. And that's how we got to where we got to.
So, Jim, a big trend that we've seen in all of aviation, but a lot of business aviation, is runway overruns.
Mhm.
Have you guys changed your procedures or anything specifically to address that? Because I could share in the airline side of things, we have a whole briefing about touchdown point. We calculate performance on stopping margin. And so, depending on the length of the runway, you have to touch down by this point, or you have to execute a go around and try again. Do you guys have anything similar to that you've done to mitigate that risk?
So we haven't gotten down that far in the weeds, but we've done some mitigation. We've done some mitigations with limiting tailwinds on contaminated runways, for instance. And we've also done some mitigations with some calls that we make. We actually do a headwind tailwind call on our stabilized call at 500 feet above the ground for awareness as to what's happening. And we've built a window basically for tailwinds. And basically from that 500-foot mark, looking down, we want to watch that tailwind get below 10 knots. So we're not exceeding a tailwind limitation. So we've made some changes as a result of that. And of course, the focus is always on stabilized approaches, because if you don't have stabilized approaches, that is always the lead indicator for runway overruns. So that focus is always strong and robust. And we make a big focus on that during our annual training, as well as when we go out there and do 135, 299 checks, and some of the other check rides we make out there. So I did see a really good presentation, what you're talking about there, Max, about designating a touchdown point and being on the ground by a certain distance. And we've had some discussion about that, but we just haven't implemented that quite yet.
Yeah, it's a good way to do it, because then, like you said, just like with the alternate procedure in APG, everybody has to be on the same page before it happens. Otherwise, it doesn't work and it gets very confusing. So I really like that. And also, if you're the non-flying pilot and you see someone come fast or whatever, and they're floating down the runway and you start to get that feeling in your seat and you're like, oh boy, at least you can say, there's our point, go around. And then like it's already done. It's not a negotiation. Oh, maybe we're running out of runway. You think we should go around? Well, no, I think I got it. Well, maybe, that's
Right.
how we end up in the grass. Is your guys' stabilized approach criteria for visual approach or VFR the same as it is? Is it 1,000 feet blanket, or is it like change?
It's effectively the same, basically 500 feet for our stabilized window. And we do it above the touchdown zone, or we do it above if we're IFR. So we raise it a little bit if we're on an instrument approach.
So we've had some high profile business aviation accidents with circling approaches in the last year or two. How have you guys looked at that risk? And do you have any thoughts on that from a fleet standpoint of trying to operate in and out of airports that sometimes you have to do it? But how do you guys mitigate that risk?
Yeah, so for some of the airports that are a little more challenging, we've raised the minimums for those airports for circling approaches in the past. We put a big emphasis on the stabilization of those circling approaches, and we've added stabilization calls as we make the turn from base to final. We've taken a look at our call-outs and procedures on circling approaches. In our industry and business aviation as a whole, that is an area that I think could use a bigger focus. And we're constantly looking at that, and we're mitigating it and reviewing it on a regular basis. Every one of our check rides has a circling approach in it. So it's something that our pilots see at least once a year. And we're very focused on ensuring that we're always updating those procedures to give us the safest operation we possibly can forward.
Another question I have, Jim, one of the greatest additions to instrument flying has been the radius to turn RNP-AR approaches. And the airlines have done them for a while. And I think a lot of those, it's really great for like to flow traffic into big airports and things like that. But where it's really super useful is in areas with a lot of terrain where you need curved approaches and things like that, which is obviously more of a business aviation thing. And I think they could be used so effectively to increase safety and operational reliability getting into airports that otherwise have sighting issues. They can't have an ILS or whatever. So do you guys use RNP-AR, or is there like a push to go to that, or where are you guys at with that?
There's always a push to go that direction. We're always looking to advance the technology and have better capability and better ability to get into different airports in a safer manner. But with that, there's some barriers to entry to get in there. Being able to get the op spec or the M spec the training associated with it, ensuring that we operate 6 different fleets of aircraft that have different avionics. And Honeywell is offering it, but Collins is not. So now you got a split fleet on who can do it and who can't. So those are some of the issues that we see in business aviation. The technology and being able to do that is phenomenal. And obviously we would love to do that. It makes us much more competitive and safer, but there are still some barriers to entry in business aviation to get there.
One day.
Absolutely. Hopefully someone out there is listening to this.
It's funny because I did it in the G450. I paid for the extra training for the training because the aircraft was capable. Then we had to become capable, and we did that. And then the last piece of the puzzle, after we were trained, the whole thing is like the FAA says to get the LOA. Yeah, now just do 100 approaches and then let us know when that's done, and we'll submit your application for the LOA. And we're like, 100?
Exactly. I've gotten into Aspen almost every other time I've gotten in there. So why do I want to do this?
Yeah, right.
It's a shame.
Yeah, typical bureaucracy there.
Yeah, they come around. To give them credit, on a couple episodes ago, they did see an article where they are making that easier now to obtain that because they realize that they become the barrier to entry for something that improves safety and efficiency. And it's like, okay, it's just like maybe with the APG divergent flight procedures we were just talking about. It takes them a minute, but they do come around.
That's a really good point. I kind of chastise the FAA there, but they really are good partners and they're trying to make things safe for us out there.
Yeah, we all do. It's the FAA, but
it is.
It's like the cops.
We're getting there. We're on the way.
It's a tough job.
So to wrap up our conversation on training, Jim, is there anything kind of on the horizon from a training standpoint that maybe you're interested in or you're excited about that you think will make a better product for pilots?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. So for Part 135 operators in general, if you've been watching the news, they just actually released a standardized 135 training program across the operators, which is great for the right size operators. For an operator of our size or our competitor size, probably not the most advantageous type of training. And part of the reason is we specify our own procedures, our own SOPs, our own callouts, all in checklists, which really doesn't fall into that bucket of standardized training across the board for the other operators. Moving towards operators our size, AQP is the direction that everyone would like to go. I know that's a personal goal of mine to hopefully someday be able to get there because it really connects the dots and everything that we have going for us in aviation, right? With the FDM being able to taking data from ASAP reports and taking incident reports from your operation and being able to take that and really tailor your training to make it the most effective you possibly can.
It's funny because when you do AQP, one of the things that's said in the cockpit a lot of times is something weird will happen. Like today we're just flying and we're in the descent and we get a forward service door light that just comes on. And I look at the guy, I'm like, God, this feels like we're in a loft right now or in AQP right now, doesn't it?
Exactly.
But it is because it's stuff that happens. And then the funny thing about it is that when things like that happen, a lot of times people had like the knee-jerk reaction of just like doing something or whatever, or throwing a switch, but now it's like immediately fall back on what you're supposed to do like the right way and pull out the QRH and take a second and talk about it. And it's remarkably effective.
You're absolutely right, Max. One of my favorite sayings is, when you have an incident or something like that in a cockpit, the first thing you should do is wind your watch. And I love that saying because it slows you down and makes you really think about what you're doing before you start throwing switches and doing things. And like you said, making sure you follow the procedures, pull out the QRH, make sure you're reading each one of the items.
Okay. I think that will wrap up our training discussion. And then do you have a story, Jim? We don't want to put you in the spot if you don't.
Well, I'm going to kind of relate something back to training. I want to talk about an incident that actually happened to me and the value of training. So 10 years into my career with Flexjet, I had a trip flying off the West Coast, going East Coast. I was coming out of Santa Ana, going all the way to Bedford, Massachusetts with a passenger. We were climbing up to the flight levels. I was about to level at 41,000 feet. And we had a catastrophic engine failure on the left-hand side. We had a fan blade depart and go through the engine. And as you can imagine, really startled myself and the other guy I was flying with. And the training kicked in. And this is the value of the training. We did exactly what we were supposed to do. We declared the emergency. We went and got the QRH out. We tried to identify what the issue was. And then we flew the airplane, which was a really big piece of it. We briefed quickly to ensure that we were making the right decisions on the approach into the runway. And we ended up diverting to Palm Springs. We were just east of Palm Springs. And I remember getting on the ground safely because I had a great guy I was flying with who really did a great job as a pilot monitoring that day. I was pilot flying and thinking that the value of the training that we had really just kicked in because everything from my primary flight training all the way up to the professional flight training I've had through Flexjet really just paid off right there in spades and dividends and made it a successful outcome. So when you go into training, have that open mind and go there with a positive attitude about wanting to learn, and it's going to pay off dividends in the long.
So did you know that the engine had failed catastrophically when you were in the cockpit, or it was a huge vibration, or what did you thing.
We had a huge vibration. It sounded initially like a shotgun went off, and it sounded like a washing machine on the spin cycle that was out of balance. And so there was obviously something very wrong. We didn't know specifically what was wrong until we actually stepped off the aircraft. I remember looking back at that engine. The cowling was totally missing from it. The cowling still lost in Palm Desert somewhere, and it was in pieces. And it was a real big eye opener to see that.
So did you take advantage of Flexjet's policy of the buy you dinner after that one? Did you?
I might have had a dinner that night.
Oh, man. That's a good story, though. That's a great point. And I hope that our listeners have enjoyed your perspective in training because it is a challenge. If you've got time, Jim, we had a Diamond Dog flight advice question a couple of episodes ago where somebody said they got stuck with a sim partner that they weren't clicking with. I think, Max, they weren't putting the work in or they were learning concepts.
Yeah, they just had excuses and wouldn't like go work on the flows. And then they would get in the sim or whatever. And it was very apparent they were super weak. Pilot flying or pilot monitoring, either way, they just weren't supporting. This was this guy's kind of first big airplane training program.
Yeah.
And so he was kind of like, what am I going to do?
So we want to give you a battlefield promotion to Diamond Dog level.
Nice.
Have you run into this with any of the folks that you work with? And how do you kind of help people work through sim partner training issues?
Yeah, sure. So we have unfortunately run into that a couple times, and we take an approach to it in a couple different ways. So with the pilot who is dealing with the person who is not pulling their load, we have a discussion with them about being a professional. As much as I would like to say every pilot is cut from the same cloth, the reality is some of us are just a little bit different. And you're going to have to deal with all sorts of individuals out there, and you have to deal with them in a professional manner. So keeping that utmost professional manner is going to be your best asset when you're dealing with this. If it totally gets out of control, if it starts to drag you down, we start monitoring the process at that point. And if the one pilot is clearly accelerating away from the other one, a lot of times we'll actually remove that pilot out so we can ensure that their training is going to be successful. But with the pilot who's not pulling their load, we have a very frank and honest conversation with them about pulling their load. And that at the current level that they're functioning and operating in the simulator, their outcome is most likely not going to be successful. And I think having that honest and frank conversation, while it's hard sometimes, really is a big eye opener for people. Because a lot of times I think people think they're doing everything that they're supposed to do. And sometimes just being able to talk to them and be direct with them will allow them a chance to reset and refocus. And we've had some success with that as well.
It's well said. Good advice. All right. Thank you for putting up with our flight advice emergency session.
Did I make a promotion? I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that's good. Welcome.
Welcome to the Diamond Dogs. We won't ask you to howl this time, but next time. Yeah. That was Jim Dunn. He's the director of training at Flexjet. We always appreciate Jim's insight. Jim, if folks are listening to you talk about the Flexjet and they're interested in learning more about becoming a pilot there, what do you recommend they do?
Couple things. So the first thing I would recommend is go out to flexjet.com and learn about the company. If you have specific questions, I'm always happy to answer them. Reach out to me at james.dunn@flexjet.com. I live on email, so I have no problem getting back to you on that. And then I'm out on LinkedIn as well. So I answer a lot of questions on LinkedIn regularly. So I always like to answer questions, and I'm always looking to any way I can be helpful to up and coming pilots, whether they're coming here or any part of their career.
What a guy. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Jim. We really appreciate all your valuable insight on aviation as a whole and Flexjet specifically.
Fantastic. Dylan, Max, thank you so much. It's always great to be on here and visit with you guys, and I appreciate the invitation.
Okay. Keeps sounding like a better and better deal. Flexjet, man.
I know. Think about it.
If you're commuting right now,
or if you want to live somewhere and not live in base.
Yeah.
Or if you want to fly business aviation and the money's getting pretty good, that is a company where you have the productivity where they're spreading that cost amongst a lot of people. So the pay may get there. It's getting there. Let's just say that. And then you do have some control. It's not 3 hard days off. It's a lot more than that.
1,500 hours they're hiring, and you make 125 right out of the gate.
Dude, I don't even want to talk about it. It's different times.
Different times. That's okay. All right, let's check in with some flight advice now. Of course, flight advice is brought to you by our friends at Harvey Watt. One of those great benefits that we mentioned is the loss of license coverage that they offer to professional pilots around the globe. You can check out all of their offerings at harveywatt.com. You know what? They also have life insurance. I've got a policy there. There's almost no exclusions. So if you want to, go scuba diving, fly a light airplane, anything like that, check them out. Okay, here we go. All right, Max, it's time for flight advice. Of course, always brought to you by our friends at Harvey Watt. Here's some advice for you. Make sure you're covered. We're going to talk a lot about coverage here in this edition of Flight Advice. You know, one of my favorite things about having a podcast, Max, is personal benefit. And for you and me, I think we're going to cash in on that right now and get a little free advice from our buddy Tim Pope.
Tim's a diamond dog, right?
Yeah, you're a diamond dog, Tim. Do you want to howl with us really quick?
That's right.
Ow! Tim, the diamond dog, here to share with us some wisdom. It's open enrollment season for most pilots, I would say, out there. All the big carriers. I know I'm going through it right now, and I imagine you are as well, Max.
I think ours, it's just coming to an end.
That's right. Tim, we wanted to pick your brain a little bit. It's that once a year where we think about HSAs, disability, legal plans, life insurance, all this stuff. What wisdom do you have to share for us on some of these fascinating topics?
Thanks, guys, for sure. And I think this is an important topic. There's a lot of carriers are having the open enrollment right now. I think there's a few things that pilots should think about. Just don't Christmas tree it. Like, this is real life stuff. Like, you may end up needing some of this stuff. You mentioned one, Dylan, and it's the HSA, right? So the HSA, I like it because it's the tax impact, right? So pilots are always looking for a way to decrease their taxable income, particularly in today's compensation environment. And the HSA is one of those ways you can do it. And the way it works is it's a health savings account. You put money in tax deferred. So that's going to lower your taxable income there. That money can be invested. And so those investments are going to grow tax deferred. And then when you pull those funds out for a qualified health expense, it's going to be tax free. We love that. It's the best game in town. However, you want to think about your own situation, right? Like if you're planning to have a kid, if there's a major surgery on the horizon, if there's expensive testing going on, the HSA may not be for you next year. So when I think about that, like the HSA, you really want a sleepy health a year for it to really work. So you would just evaluate the things like your premiums, your deductible, and your out-of-pocket maximums across your healthcare plan options to determine if the HSA is good for you. But if it is, the contribution is going up in 23. And if you're age 50, you can put in an additional $1,000. So.
Tim, another thing that honestly don't know a ton about is life insurance. And we see that in open enrollment a bunch. Some carriers and employers will pay for your insurance. Sometimes they don't. Like, can you talk us through a little bit about how we should look at that?
Yeah, so that's a good one. So in open enrollment, a lot of times you're probably going to be familiar with the group term. So this is, the age band. So if I'm between 40 and 45, I'm paying this rate, for insurance. But a lot of the major carriers will pay for a decent chunk of life insurance for you. So look at the pilot agreement and figure out, what that amount is going to be. And the key here is it's employer paid. Anything that they pay over $50,000, you're going to pay income on. You'll see that in your pay stub. But employer paid life insurance is great. So just know what you have. And then you've got your group term. And I've been running the analysis for a number of pilots this season. And what I'm finding is that it may be best to use the group term to just top off your insurance need. So let's say you need $3 million of coverage, right? Well, you can get $1.75 million through Harvey Watt at an individual rate, and it's going to be locked in for your 20, 25, 30 years, however old you are. Then you've got your employer paid insurance. It's typically a multiple of your salary or your hourly rate. Deltas is like a 12-year captain rate, that kind of thing. So depending on your carrier, it could be a couple $100,000 or it could be, $500,000 or $800,000, right? So you've got your individual and you've got your employer, and then you can use the group term to fill in the bucket. And the reason I say use the group term to fill in the bucket is because your group term is just designed to become more expensive over time. And so when you plot that out, say you're 35 going to 65, and you look at the rates for group term, it's just going to get more and more expensive the older you get. And then we expect the bands themselves to increase with inflation. So I'd want that to top off my insurance need. And that might be the smallest bucket I have.
I know the thing that I always scratch my head is like, well, how much coverage do I need? Because some employers are like, yeah, it's $200,000. We're going to pay for you. And you're like, is that enough? And so I imagine that's one of those things where you kind of got to talk to somebody like yourself. Actually, like everybody's situation is pretty different, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're young, single, no children. You may not need very much at all, right? Married, And with children or charitable inclinations, that's going to change your game. And then also you've got children and then your spouse. So you got to look at the spousal responsibilities. So typically what I tell folks to do is like walk through a what if scenario with your spouse. Obviously there's numbers I can crunch, but like if I passed away and left my wife behind, what would she want? And the last thing I wanted to think about was like, oh, she's going to go and get remarried somewhere. So you
Well, you're going to pay for a very beautiful wedding. It's
yeah, exactly. This is well taken care of. You want to do that for the pilot and then the non-pilot spouse and work backwards and then just fill in the gaps. Like that's how you do it.
Gotcha. Okay. And then next on the hit list here, there's some legal stuff. Can you talk a little bit about what we should be thinking about when it comes to legal offerings?
Yeah, so that's a good one. And it's also fairly inexpensive too. And so when you think about the legal plan that's offered by, again, most carriers, it's likely going to go through a MetLife legal services or legal plan. If you're a pilot and you're like most Americans, so 60% of Americans do not have an estate plan, this is a way you can do it. So sign up for the legal plan, and then you can find an attorney in the network in your area to draft your documents, your will, your healthcare, medical directives, your living will, a trust if you need one for those wishes. And then also it can help out with any transactions. So if you're buying and selling real estate and things like that, the legal plan it may be often overlooked, but take advantage of it. What you're going to pay over the cost or the course of a year is likely cheaper than 1 or 2 hours worth of an attorney's time. So
you may not have to get that every year, right? Like if you get your estate planning done and trust and that kind of stuff, maybe pay for it for a year and then, interesting.
Yeah. And then drop it. And then if something comes back up, you can pick it up. Or if you anticipate. The other thing that I'm seeing a lot of the legal plans do is offer like documents for elder parents. So if you're in your 40s or 50s, chances are you have aging parents and you may have young children as well, like that sandwich generation. And so the legal plan can help you if you're one of those people who may become financially responsible for your parents.
Good times.
Good times. Good. Really? It's funny because all that estate planning stuff is one of the reasons only 60% of people have one is because it's miserable to talk about all of this horrible stuff about if you die or just your wife dies or if people die and, or you get disabled and it's awful. But at some point you got to grow up and face the music.
No, you're exactly right, Max. I've had a client tell me that. He's like, nobody likes talking about this stuff.
Yeah, it's horrible. You get like this questionnaire and you got to fill it out. It's all, who would you send your kids to if you both die? And like all this stuff, it's terrible. But it's a necessary evil, in my opinion.
For sure. Tim, let's talk about some of the disability loss of license insurance offerings that pilots are seeing.
If there's nothing else that a pilot takes away, check this out. You guys and girls know how well you can get paid. You know what the potential is for your career. Go ahead and secure your income through loss of license or disability insurance. And I've heard you guys say it on the show multiple times, and it's true that not all disability or loss of license insurance that your carrier negotiates or provides for you is created the same. So some key things that you want to think about is your elimination period. What is that? And that's the waiting time. So that's from the moment you get disabled to when your benefits start to kick in. How long are you going to have to wait? Is it 90 days, which is fairly attractive, or is it 9 months? And so how are you going to supply your needs during that elimination period? Also, what's the definition of disability? So initially, that definition is going to be, hey, if you can't hold your first class medical, then you're disabled. But how long does that definition last? On the short end, is it 2 years? And then the definition changes to like, hey, you can't fly a plane, but you can do any work, any occupation. So we're going to cut out benefits, right? Like, is that going to be enough? Are you going to be in the middle of like paying for your kid's college and a second home or an airplane that you bought? And all of a sudden it's like, hey, I can't fly a jet, but I can go work in an office making substantially less. Is that going to satisfy me? So is it 2 years? Is it 5 years? Is it going to take you out to 62 or 65 where you meet up with Social Security? So it really pays to figure out like what you have and then determine if you're comfortable with that and then fill in the gap. Go talk to Harvey Watt. They have short-term, long-term, and extended-term disability. You know that the definition is going to be own occupation, which is the most favorable definition. So there's things like that. Again, like Max, it's depressing to think about. But this stuff happens. Chances of you getting some kind of disability, either short-term or long-term in your life, right, is high. I was reading through one the other day and it was like, think about long-term care and things like that. So the other thing I would say is check out the exclusions. You can get disabled at work. You can get disabled not at work and they'd cover you. But if you were ag flying, they would not cover you. So to all of your listeners in the Midwest during the summertime, don't pick up extra hours flying ag because if something happens, you're not covered. And, you also got to keep your nose clean too. So you can't commit like a felony and then, write a disability policy from prison. Not going to work.
There's some housekeeping stuff we got to do too. I know I had to deal with this year was like checking all the beneficiaries and trying to figure that out. And I know a lot of people just kind of randomly fill it out. Do you have any advice for us when we're doing all the beneficiary stuff? And then I heard about a guy that got divorced and forgot to change his beneficiary. And then his ex-wife ended up getting some stuff too. So
you nailed it. You do not want that happening because the current spouse would not be pleased. So there's the divorce one. And then I heard about a guy who died. Like this was like a friend of mine. His grandfather died, never changed. So then grandmother never changed the beneficiary. And then she passed away. Thankfully, there was some recourse, but probably in your divorce situation, there was probably no recourse.
It's not always the most exciting stuff, but we're adults now. We're all adults flying airplanes.
Yeah.
We're the big kids. Can take care of some of this stuff.
Yeah. So the last one I would say is your HSA and your 401k contributions. Those maximums move from time to time. They are going up in 23. And I know your HSA typically is like a manual. Your 401k may or may not be depending on how you have that set up. So just take a look at those things and see if there's opportunity for you to increase there. So
it's good stuff, Tim. We always appreciate you bringing us the knowledge we need to do our job better. Protect our families. And this is one of the reasons that we enjoy doing the show is bringing to light things that are maybe not so obvious for folks.
Yeah. So like you said, it's not exciting stuff, but you've got to do it. Hopefully this can help folks. Just knock it out. If you have questions, reach out to us and we'll help.
Awesome. Tim, we really appreciate you joining us. We'll have all of your information in the show notes. Folks can schedule a call with you. Thank you so much for your expertise and we'll look forward to the next time we get a chat.
Thanks, Tim.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Max, that's going to do it for episode 88. It's been a big day already. And it's not over yet.
I'm telling you.
You got a big concert to go to tonight?
We got Sky Kids tomorrow.
Oh,
we'll talk about that in the next episode.
Oh, yeah. Looking forward to promoting that. Doing good in the Murphy Moose.
I know. I got wrapped up in another volunteer event. Yeah.
Look at you. You've been spending too much time around me.
I know. Flying toys to the Indian reservation.
Oh, I didn't know that.
My hangar neighbors, he walks by and stops and goes, "You could fit a lot of stuff in that airplane." I was like, "Probably. What are you looking to haul?"
It's just this white bag.
Like, do you know Roger Reeves?
Yeah. Just a bunch of baking soda we need to move.
Just a bunch of bricks wrapped in cellophane. No big deal.
It's no problem.
So anyway.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's a little teaser.
Yeah.
I like that. Can't wait. Okay. Thanks so much to Jim Dunn from Flexjet for joining us. Thanks to Tim Pope for calling in and providing his expertise. Thanks to Advanced Aircrew Academy and Harvey Watt for their longtime support of the program. We are so excited to finish strong in 2022. And boy, wait till you see what we got planned for 2023. It's going to be awesome. But let's just take it 2 weeks at a time. So until next time, remember,
flexibility is the key to air power. See you next time.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Ted.
Bye, Ted.
The statements made in this show are our own opinions and do not reflect, nor were they under any direction from any of our employers.